at the end, we will give you a link to complete your evaluation. And by completing your evaluation, your name will be entered into a gift card drawing that we will do directly after the Q&A. So it's really important to us that we get your feedback so we can improve in the future. And so we want to make it, a little bit more interesting for you to complete that evaluation. And then just an important piece of information is that the voting information we will be talking about tonight is California specific. So when you hear us talk about different regulations, it is California specific. But if you need to find local to you information, we encourage you to visit vote.gov. So that's vote.gov. And you can put in your address and that'll connect you with where to register to vote in your area and everything you need to know for your state or local place. And that link is also in the chat. All right, let's go to the next slide, please. So why are we here today? Part of what we're talking about is voting and election myths. Why is that information important? Next slide, please. It's important because voting myths affect our voting behavior, right? So information that you receive then affects what you do with that information. And a big problem today is that misinformation about voting is spread from person to person, word of mouth, through social media, through the news. It's everywhere. And if someone tells you something that convinces you that you can't vote legally, or that you should be afraid or uncomfortable about voting, or that your vote just doesn't matter, it doesn't count. If you hear that enough times, you are not going to go out and vote. And we see that with voter turnout numbers being so much lower than the actual eligible voters. And so those voting myths directly impact whether you cast your vote, and then that impacts the people and the policies that are brought in as a result of the people who do go out and vote. And there are some groups who vote in every single election. And if you are not part of that group, then those policies are going to affect you. And sometimes it doesn't hurt you, but sometimes those policies or those people who are brought in harm you, right? And they cause direct harm to you and your community. That harm, then you internalize that experience, and it makes you even more convinced that you shouldn't get out there and vote. Because why vote if every time voting happens, something negative happens? Communities are decimated, people put in policies that hurt. Why go vote, right? And so then your negative experience is reinforced. You're more convinced not to vote. And what happens as well is we spread that information to others. We talk to other people. So when we don't feel good about something, we share that information. And that then gives people reason not to go vote. So that's why we are talking about these issues. And the first thing we're going to talk about is just some myths around the elections and voting. So Monique, can you take it away, please? And next slide.
Good evening, everyone. My name is Monique Fordham, and I will talk about dispelling the voter myths. So myth number one, if I leave something blank on my ballot won't be counted. In reality, if you leave something blank on your ballot, the vote is not, that particular vote is not recorded. So no vote. So if you, say for instance, if you don't vote for one person, that doesn't mean that your entire ballot is thrown in the trash. It just means that you didn't vote for that person, and no vote is counted for that person. But your vote, your whole ballot is still counted. So don't think that if you don't know who to vote for and you leave a space blank, that your vote is not going to be counted. Myth number two, vote by mail ballots are thrown out if they arrive after election day. Myth. County election officials will count all vote by mail ballots that are postmarked on or before election day, which is November 3rd, and arrive no later than 17 days after the election. Myth number three, provisional ballots are only counted if the race is close. Provisional ballots are those cast by voters who registered actually on election day at the polls. That is a myth. All eligible provisional ballots are counted. Provisional ballots must be checked to ensure that the voter has registered properly and they did not cast a ballot elsewhere. Because this human review takes longer, Then most of these ballots, the provisional ballots, are typically counted after election day and after the vote by mail, but they are counted. Next slide, please. Myth. People with no fixed permanent address cannot register to vote. So say, for instance, if you are in between homes, right? The reality of that is not true. If you do not have a street address, you can use the cross streets of where you spend most of your time. You can always use an address of a friend or a relative, a P.O. box, or even an organization that allows you to receive mail. For example, a homeless shelter. Myth. You must present ID to vote. That's a myth. In reality, in general, if you are registered to vote, you will not be asked for an ID to vote. Even if you do not show up on the registration list, you still don't have to show your ID. If it is your first time voting in a federal election, you may be asked for an ID. If you do not have an ID, you still have the right to cast your vote, which will be a provisional ballot. And then provide ID before the election period is over. Details will be provided by the poll worker. So you ask them, what is it that you need to do? Thank you. Sorry, Darlene. You're on mute.
Good evening, everyone. Next slide, please. Thank you, Sora Monique. Persons with criminal history. So often we know individuals that may have been incarcerated for different crimes or different offenses. And typically individuals don't know that they still have the right to vote in some cases. So let's go over a couple of things that are important for people who have a criminal history. So if an individual has been in the county jail and they are serving a misdemeanor sentence, that never affects their right to vote. A misdemeanor is not like a felony and doesn't have the same concern or the same issue. So they are always eligible to register to vote and they have the right to vote. Because jail time is a condition of probation, a misdemeanor or a felony, you can also vote, being that if you're on probation. Serving a felony jail sentence, most people think that they can't vote, but depending on the status, there is a possibility that they can register to vote. Awaiting trial. Awaiting trial means that they have not been convicted of a crime yet. They are awaiting trial to find out if they are innocent or guilty or proven otherwise. They can still register to vote. On probation, register to vote. You can still register to vote. On mandatory supervision, being monitored by the county or by the state, you are still eligible to register to vote. On post-release, community supervision, community service, you can still register. And then the other thing is on federal supervised release. You're being monitored, you're being looked at, you're being overviewed, but you still have that right to vote. A person with a juvenile wardship can also register to vote. It's important that we encourage people who have criminal histories because they have enough biases as we go. Now, these are some of the reasons that you cannot register to vote. Now, some of these are very, very similar to yes and no. And so if you have questions, please put them in the chat. So currently in prison, that means if you are serving time in a state prison or a federal prison, you are incarcerated. You cannot register to vote. Currently serving a state prison felony sentence in a county jail or other correctional facility. That means again that you're in custody and so you are not eligible to vote. Currently in county jail awaiting transfer to state or federal prison for a conviction. That means you've been already charged and you've been convicted of the crime, then you are not eligible to register to vote. Currently in county jail for parole violation, which is a little different than probation violation. Again, you cannot register to vote. And then lastly, currently on parole with the California Department of Corrections and Rehabilitation. You are not eligible to register to vote. What I really want to emphasize here on this slide is if you're not in custody, there's more of a possibility, there are parameters, but that you can register to vote if you're not in custody. The difference between the left and the right with can and cannot has a lot to do with if you are incarcerated currently. So just remember that. Please encourage individuals that feel that they can't vote, that, you know, I've been to jail, I have a misdemeanor, I have a past criminal history. Please, please, please get them to follow up with their probation officer, and also get them to go to some of our sites that we're going to list so that they can find out if they're eligible to vote. We need everybody, and this is an election, and I'm not going to get on my high horse, but we need everybody's vote. And those people with criminal histories really, really need to vote, because there are some things that I'm sure that they would like to have done differently in some cases. So thank you. Next slide, please. So my vote doesn't count. You've met people and they told you, oh, one vote doesn't count. One vote, one person, it doesn't count. Some of you guys remember the infamous George Bush, Al Gore in 2000. Remember, ultimately Bush was declared the victor by winning Florida. That was the state that was, you know, dramatic, and, you know, everybody said they cheated, with just 537 votes. So every vote matters. In New Mexico, Gore won the state by just 366 votes. So everybody's vote matters. It doesn't matter how large, how small, your vote matters. In 2017, a Virginia House of Delegates race ended in a tie. Some of you guys may remember that too. The tie was broken by picking a name out of a bowl. It got down to it like a raffle, like an opportunity drawing type situation. By winning the election, David Yancey gave the House a Republican majority just by one seat. Democrat Al Franken, you guys remember him in 2008, he ran the Senate race. He won that by 312 votes out of 2.9 million cast. His win gave the Democrats a supermajority of 60 seats. So with 312 votes out of 2.9 million cast, that can make the difference between the House majority. And then lastly, some of you guys that are from the hometown here in California, Veronica Jones. So there were 42,777 people who voted for the Altadena Town Council on June 17, 2017. There were seven opponents. And she won with 54 total votes cast. That was it. So there were 7 opponents. There were a couple at 21. There were a couple who had a little bit less. And she won with just 54 votes cast. But again, I want to point this out. There are 42,777 people in the city of Altadena. All right, she won with 54 votes. So that also says that a lot of people don't go to the polls. Now, what I want to encourage you to do is always be on the forefront of decision making. A lot of people after the fact, oh, I didn't like her. I don't like this person. I don't like the initiatives. I don't like what they stand for. You want to be at the table in the beginning. So here's the deal. Your vote counts. I want you voting for community leaders. I want you voting for community members. I want you voting for city council, elected officials. You may see Breonna Taylor. So the Attorney General, and a lot of people have their views about the Attorney General, but voting for the Attorney General, for district attorney positions is vital, especially if you have views about law enforcement and different things like that. So vote, vote, vote. City council is important. The Board of Supervisors is important. Vote for everything that you can, the educational system, the supervisor, every position that you can. You need to be at the table and you need to be voting. Thank you, everybody. Next slide. I'm going to pass this over to Alexis so she can continue. Know your news.
Thanks so much, Charlene. So one thing, as we mentioned earlier, that impacts whether people vote, how people vote, whether they're ready to vote, is their information that they receive. Do they know about what's on the ballot? Do they know who's on the ballot? And all of those items are impacted by the way information is shared today. Next slide, please. So why does knowing about media literacy, understanding what the media is saying to you, why is any of that important? Well, the fact of the matter is we know that media is constructed messages, right? So whether someone in this group probably works in marketing, probably works in ads, probably works, at like a nonprofit organization, and you put together messages that are going to further the viewpoint that you want people to take away from it. So if you work in a nonprofit that provides after school food for young people, right? You're going to write newsletters and messages that talk about what you're doing and talk about it in a positive light. Now, that's a positive way, obviously, to use media, like a newsletter. But the fact of the matter is, just like that is in a positive light, there's ways to use media in a negative light. And all media is made by someone. It doesn't just come from nowhere. It's a billion-dollar industry. So it's made for a reason. And that is the same when we talk about political media as well. All of those things are made for a reason. And the reason why media literacy is so important is because it allows you the ability to analyze and evaluate the messages that you're receiving and understand really what they are trying to say to you and what they're trying to get you to do. Next slide, please. So why does it matter? I mean, the biggest reason why it matters is that media creates profit. Right? So we know that all these media companies, why do they do what they do? Because it makes money through ad sales, right? So clickbait, when you get an article that says something completely ridiculous and you're like, what? Let me click on that to find out. Well, every click just made them a little bit of money, right? So people are doing this for money, and social media sites especially are unregulated. They don't have to do anything that they don't want to do. And we know that all the time. We see Facebook having to constantly go to Congress and testify about what they're doing. Unfortunately, that's the same for like journalism outlets that you may have trusted in the past, right? So think of your big media companies that people, whether it's a New York Times or an LA Times or, a CNN or 60 Minutes or whatever. These are all these things, folks will recognize, like Walter Cronkite. Back in the day, there were journalists that you felt that you could trust. Whereas nowadays, because most media outlets are owned by the same few companies, and those companies are looking for revenue, they are not necessarily going to say, oh, well, this isn't true, let's not put it out there. They're going to do what makes them the most money. So that's why it's important that we are able to identify when something is false, and that we're able to say, okay, this is false. How do I then make sure that the people around me understand that? Next slide, please. So what's the difference between misinformation and disinformation? And why is it important? Misinformation, the way to remember this is that it's false information that is mistakenly shared. So it's information that you might have received that sounds like common sense. You've heard it a million times before and you share it with someone else. You're not intending to deceive them. You're just sharing what you think is good information. For example, for a long time, you could not vote in California if you had been to prison. That was the law of the land. So now there are folks who don't realize that the laws have changed, and so they are still spreading that misinformation. They're not doing it on purpose. That's just what they know, and their information has not been updated yet. Another thing, with this Census 2020, that if you have not filled out your census, please do. They have extended the deadline till the end of this month. But one thing that happens is that people bring up is someone will say, don't fill out your census because they're going to tell your landlord that you have too many people living here in this apartment, right? Like maybe you're only supposed to have 3 and you have 7. And so then the person won't fill out their census. Well, that sounds like good information, right? Like I'm trying to help you make sure nothing happens to the place that you live, but that's actually incorrect. The census is not allowed to share information with anyone, including other government agencies, but especially your landlord. So the difference with this information is that it's false information that is deliberately shared. It is intended to deceive you so that whatever person or group is sharing it with you, they can reach their goal. So for example, groups who want to suppress the vote might put out messages intended to make sure that you don't go vote. For example, they may tell people, oh, you can't register on election day. In California, you can cast a provisional ballot. It is your right to cast a ballot on election day. You can walk right up, register, cast your ballot. So someone saying that, they are doing it because they want fewer people to vote, especially in neighborhoods or precincts where those votes will make a huge difference on the outcome for that area. Next slide, please. So let's think about some things you may have experienced on social media, especially. Have you ever gone out of your way to share something that's researched and verified fact, and you receive a negative response from people? They argue back with you. No, that's wrong. You don't have it right. Those are not, no, you need to look at this thing instead. That doesn't feel good, number one, but number two, it can feel very frustrating as well, because you're like, I researched this. I went out of my way. Or for example, maybe you're an expert in something. We see people who might be an expert in, you're an expert in tigers. So you make a post about tigers and tiger cubs and how many cubs they have. And then you have your whole PhD, you studied this for years. And then someone comes back and says, no, tigers can only have one cub at a time. And you say, well, but this is my area of expertise. I know this. My PhD is literally in tiger cubs, right? And that's really frustrating, but that's because people are not necessarily having access to the same information that you do. Or maybe you saw something on social media, you said, oh, this looks really interesting. I need to share this with people. You repost it on your Instagram page, and then you find out later it was a straight up lie, or it was, a mix of the truth and a lie. And you're like, oh, what do I do? Do I go back? Do I take it down? But now a lot of people already saw it. So, or I got 500 likes on it. I don't really want to take it down because, that was a lot of likes, right? That's the thing that happens a lot of the time. Have you ever had to prove to someone that something they shared was not the truth or was, not quite right? And now you're in that position of saying, oh, like, that's not, that's not right. How do I convey to this person that they shared something that's not helpful because it's not the truth? And here's something that happens more rarely. Have you ever changed your opinion after finding out that something you believed was not true? So we very easily, I can have one article come across my email, my Instagram, whatever, and be like, oh yes, absolutely, agree, 100%. I have not looked up anything. I have not Googled anything, Wikipedia, nothing. And I'm like, yes, because that falls in line with my beliefs. So of course I'm going to believe it. If Beyonce says something, likely I'm going to be like, yes, she was correct, because why wouldn't she know? I like her, so what she said makes sense to me. And then I may find out later, well, Beyonce doesn't know either. She's not an expert in this. And now I'm wrong because I've listened to her and I need to change my opinion. That's not something that happens as often. A lot of times, once we form an opinion, that's it and that's all. Next slide, please. So here's just a quick example. Last week, many of you may have seen this article come across where you were. There's a big article that spread around the world that said Mitch McConnell was refusing to debate his election rival if there was a female moderator. And that article spread, everywhere, like wildfire. Why? Because if you know Mitch McConnell's past, it's probably very easy to believe that he would not go to a debate that had a female moderator. If you remember in 2017, when Elizabeth Warren was asking questions of the nominated Supreme Court Justice, Judge Sessions, and he kept interrupting her. And that's where the comment, nevertheless, she persisted, came from, because she kept trying to talk and he kept trying to stop her. So then if you see this article, you're like, oh, totally believe that's something he would do, except it was completely false. No one from his campaign had even talked to the people who were setting up the debate. So he didn't have a chance to say anything about the moderator, whether it was a woman or a man. And this all came from a press release that the Kentucky Democrats had sent out that said this information that actually wasn't true. And so things like this spread everywhere. On Reddit, I don't know if any of you use Reddit, but it is a huge social media site with millions of people. And just on Reddit, that article got 62,000 upvotes, which is like likes. It got 62,000 likes. 62,000 people saw that, said, oh, I like this, and probably didn't look at anything else. They saw the article title, and that was it. And so that is what happens. It's really easy, especially when we already believe somebody is good. Like if I already believe Beyonce is good, then I believe everything she says. And if we already believe someone is bad, like Mitch McConnell, we already believe he's sexist, then I'm going to believe this article title without doing more research. Next slide, please. So that is an example of confirmation bias, that I believe what he says because I already have preconceived notions about who he is as a person. What actually is confirmation bias? It is literally the fact that humans are hardwired to pay more attention and to believe information that fits in with what we already believe, what already is part of our worldview. So we're gonna watch a short video about confirmation bias because it just explains it really well, and then we'll move on. Oops, next slide with the video, please. Oh, there you go.
Hey, come here. Do you know that RuPaul claims that Trump touched him inappropriately in the 90s? Or that Obama signed an executive order banning the Pledge of Allegiance in schools nationwide? Okay, we all know that was some grade A, top shelf, premium fake news. But you knew that, right? You're way too smart and well-informed to fall for that BS. But what if falling for fake news isn't about intelligence or how much information you have? What if we're hardwired to believe what we want to believe, regardless of the facts? The 2016 presidential election saw fake news come out of nowhere. A BuzzFeed analysis showed that the top 20 fake news articles on Facebook generated more clicks than the top 20 real articles from every major publication combined. They were shared millions of times. And it's not that we're just sharing fake news. We appear to be believing the stories too. A recent poll found that people believe fake news articles were somewhat or very accurate 75% of the time. How can we be falling for fake news when we have these things? We have instant access to more information than we've ever had before. Debunking misinformation should be a piece of cake, right? Decades of brain research say, no. Turns out, our brains have other plans. A little something called cognitive bias. Cognitive bias is defined as a limitation in our thinking that can cause flaws in our judgment. It's kind of like an annoying brain glitch that can lead us to make faulty conclusions. Fake news often exploits this and our brains love it, even if we're not conscious of it happening. Once we form conclusions, they're hella hard to change, even if we're presented with facts or evidence that directly contradict those conclusions. So what exactly is going on in our brains to make us think that fake news is real news? Why can't facts change our minds? There are many flavors of cognitive bias, but one of the most researched is confirmation bias. We seek out information that we believe or want to believe is true. It also leads us to ignore or minimize facts that threaten what we believe. So here's a study that explains how it works. Back in 2004, during the Kerry Bush election, researchers studied a group of 30 people, half Democrat, half Republican. Both candidates did what politicians do. They flip-flopped on the issues. Then the study asked the participants to analyze what the candidates said. The participants let the candidate in their own party off the hook, but were super critical of the candidate in the other party. When researchers looked at their brain scans, they found that the area of the brain responsible for reason, the dorsolateral prefrontal cortex, wasn't active. So people weren't using reason when evaluating the candidates they liked, but they were using the part of the brain that processes emotion, the orbital frontal cortex, a classic case of confirmation bias. And their brains were also rewarding them with a rush of dopamine, a neurotransmitter that makes you feel good. So is there any upside to confirmation bias? Well, it could help protect us from ideas that may threaten our social standing in our tribe. Dan Kahan, a law and psychology professor at Yale University, calls it identity protective cognition. We humans are hypersocial, so it's more important to protect our values in our relationships with family and friends than it is to risk losing that by adopting new beliefs. Are you familiar with Tomi Lahren? She's a conservative political commentator.
A protest is a peaceful objection to a grievance. A bunch of sore losers occupying a space is called a tantrum.
But recently, she expressed her pro-choice view on abortion.
No, I'm pro-choice, and here's why.
As a result, members of her conservative tribe turned on her. So, how do we defeat confirmation bias? Well, you really can't. but our 3-step plan can help you get around it. Step 1 is recognize. Recognize that you have this bias in the first place. We all do. You made it this far in the video, so you can check that one off. Step 2 is consider. Consider that you may not really understand what you think you understand. Researchers call it the illusion of explanatory depth. Let's say I strongly believe that GMOs are bad for me. If someone forces me to explain it, I just might realize that I don't understand it as well as I thought I did. Now, I might be less confident in my belief and more receptive to another point of view. Step 3 is research. Research and break down the opposing viewpoint. You may realize that your understanding of where they're coming from is a bit too shallow. So now you know the perils of confirmation bias and have some tools to beat it. Let's try it out. Without being a smartass, pick a controversial topic and use step 3 on it. Don't try to persuade, but instead use research and facts to lay out why the other side believes what it believes. Put your dorsolateral prefrontal cortex to good use, will you?
Thank you, Sora Vanessa. If you could go to the next slide, please. So as you were saying in the video, the biggest thing that you can do really is research, right? Ask questions. Ask who created the information, who's sharing it, why are they sharing it? What does it say? Did you look at the context, the full story, past the title of the article? Did you look at the sources? You know, check the authors. Think about who their intended audience is. There are a lot of things going around that are actually jokes or satire that get cut and are made to seem like they were serious, for example. So you have to be careful about what you see. The best thing you can do is to keep asking questions. Next slide, please. One good way, or a couple good ways, to fact check what you see is to use different websites whose sole purpose is to help you fact check. So Snopes.com is actually a really great place. They don't just focus on politics, they focus on, you know, memes, rumors, urban legends, everything. And you can go type in anything there and find out if it's actually true. And they put in context to whether or not it's true or not. PolitiFact and factcheck.org, those are more politics-based. They are both nonpartisan, so they're not for any party specifically. And you can go there and find out, you know, is this true that this candidate said that or did this or whatever it is. But as he said in the video, think before you post things, talk to your family and friends, and then evaluate your own biases and do research. Next slide, please. So as we're talking about talking to family and friends and your network about these issues, as I mentioned earlier, sometimes these issues can get very contentious because why? As he said in the video, when you have strong beliefs and you're in group, your family or your friends have those beliefs and you challenge them, that can cause a lot of anger, a lot of frustration, and it can cause you to be ostracized, you know, if you decide you feel differently than everybody else does. So we just wanted to talk about some ways that can help you start those conversations. First, get permission from the person you're talking to. Ask them if they're in the headspace to talk about this, you know, important subject that could lead to some drama, right? So we are all bombarded with a lot right now, especially with the quarantine. Ask permission and say, hey, do you mind talking about this right now? Is this a good time? Don't do it when they're sleepy, hungry, you know, all those sorts of things. They just had a bad day at work. That's not the time to discuss the presidential election, okay? Let them rest first, okay? Connect with a topic that's important to them. So especially when we are talking about young people who very often it can seem like they are not connected to the process and to the, especially when it comes to politics, to the things we're talking about, or they tell you like, this doesn't really have anything to do with me. Like none of this has anything to do with my real life, and I don't see why I should be interested in this. Try to find a topic that you can connect with them on that has to do with, for example, voting. So there's a proposition, I forget which one it is, I think it's 15, that's directly talking about providing more funds for community college, for education, because students are getting saddled with student loans that are way too high. So that is something that a younger person, someone who hasn't, you know, gotten their education yet, would connect with on a different level. Maybe someone whose family who's been impacted by the carceral system. Maybe they've had a lot of people who have been in and out of that system, and they just feel like, what's the point? The police are gonna, cause us drama regardless. Talk to them and say, hey, Prop 17 would restore the vote for parolees, people who cannot currently vote, right? So you have to try to connect where they are. Another thing is to respect people's boundaries. If they are upset, if they are walking away, they don't want to talk to you anymore, don't push it. That's not fair to anybody, yourself or them. Use your own platform. So maybe you see something on Instagram or Facebook and someone's saying something that's not true, or you disagree with it. Instead of commenting on their platform, go on your own and share that information so that you're not being antagonistic to them. And the other thing you can do, especially if you're in person, is talk in private. If you really think it would be a bad idea to call someone out at that moment, wait until you're alone so that you can talk to them and come at them with compassion and empathy, and they won't feel defensive just because they're in front of a group. So just some examples of things you can, change your language. For example, maybe somebody at your work says something to you that is blatantly racist or sexist or homophobic, whatever it is. And it just is what it is. Instead of calling them racist, because that's not going to help, we know that, maybe ask them, is race really relevant to what we're talking about? Maybe we can go back to the issue at hand, right? Redirect so that there is a different way to have that conversation. Say that somebody is completely wrong. It has never worked to tell someone, no, you're wrong. That's just not going to do it. That's not helpful. But maybe you can ask them, how did you come to that conclusion? Or can you share with me some information that'll help me understand your point of view? Saying things like everybody knows that, or why don't you already know that? Instead, ask to share information with them. And then the last one that comes out, nobody likes should. You should do this, you should know this, you should, etc. Instead, change your language. Change it to maybe you can consider this. Perhaps we can talk about this more so that we can understand where both of us are coming from. Think about your language and how you're going about things. I think it is really helpful to think about how you would like to be spoken to, how you receive information, so that as we're all working together as a community towards our liberation, we are getting where we want to get to as quickly as we want to get there. That's really important because we want to make sure that we are getting what we need for our communities as soon as possible. So we shouldn't have to wait for liberation for the things that we need. So we hope that this information will help you to be able to have those conversations, to recognize that media when it comes across, and to really be able to share factual and true information with your peers, your family, your friends, your networks. So we're gonna stop there and go ahead to our Q&A. Can you advance to the next slide, please? As we are doing this Q&A section, it would be really helpful if you would go complete your evaluation. You can complete your evaluations while we're doing the Q&A. So someone will drop the evaluation link into the chat, or you can use your phone, your smartphone, to take a picture of the QR code that is there on the screen for you, and that will also take you to the evaluation. And you can complete that while we're having our question and answer, so that you will be entered into the gift card drawing. All right, now it is time for questions. Or Kanisha.
Sorry, Marion, the first question reads, how do we get more young people engaged in the civic process?
So, I mean, the first thing you can do, one, is start with the young people that you know, right? So your kids, their friends, nieces, nephews, all those people that are in your orbit, that's the first thing you can do, is start talking to them. Make it a regular part of the conversations you have. Talk to them, say, oh, I'm gonna fill out my ballot today. You want, can I help you? Can I show you? Can I share a link with you? It's also connecting with them where they are. A lot of young people are on TikTok, right? And so while TikTok stresses me out, but also I have nieces and nephews. So when they send me, oh, look at this person, I go look at it so I can see what they're seeing and what they are hearing. Can someone please put the evaluation link in the chat, please? And as Monique was saying in the chat, don't leave out your students. You have a unique platform as educators, and it's really important to fulfill that part of your civic duty. And obviously you cannot be partisan in the classroom, right? But what you can do is share the how to register to vote, how to research your ballot, all the how-tos about how to be an active citizen. And then of course, it's getting involved in your community as well, because young people are only going to listen to people that they trust. And right now, they tend to trust more influencers and TikTok stars and video game players than they necessarily trust the adults in their lives, because they only see you or hear from you when you want something from them, right? So we have to consistently be involved in our community, so that way we can, when we do have something important to say, they'll listen to it.
The next question is there any information that will aid lower income community members to decide whether to go stand in line at the polls or go to or mail in the ballot? Mail-in ballots are in question in low income communities as mailboxes are being removed and are limited. What should folks do in this situation?
So next week we'll have a whole webinar that's just specifically about voting, mail-in and in person. Obviously, it's a personal decision. There's a lot of people who are going to go in person regardless, because that feels, more comfortable for them and they know where their ballot is going. There's also a bunch of options. So you can drop off your ballot at any polling place by 8 p.m. on election day. So it can go there. It can go in a vote drop-off box. While there have been mailboxes removed, you may have noticed large drop-off boxes. They have like yellow coloring on them that say vote drop-off here. They can be placed in those boxes as well. Or you can drop them off directly at your county elections office. Obviously, if you don't have transportation, that's going to be harder. I know for the last few years, both Lyft and Uber have offered free rides to the polls. So that may also be an option for folks that, they need to drop off their ballot. They may be able to do it that way. I would also say, maybe you can get some mutual aid together in your community and help people get to the polls. Even if it's through your church or just your family says, hey, we want to help 5 people get to the polls. How can we help sponsor that kind of thing? So that may be an option as well. But I'd also say tune in next week. We're going to have a county elections expert who works there here. So I would definitely look around for all those options. Anything you want to add, Darlene? I wasn't sure.
No, that's perfect what you said. I think you hit all the bullets.
Great. All right.
Next question. In LA County, there are now voting centers. People can take, well, that's not a question, it was a comment, sorry. The next question is, who picks up ballots from the LAC Register of Voters?
So it is county elections officials, I guess is the short answer. So those are all picked up by the people who are already working for the county. It's not just like random people who pick it up. It's people who are certified. They're the only folks allowed to do that. That's why they all go in lock boxes and things like that. So it's not like the poll workers take your vote that you dropped off and go drop it off somewhere else. No, it's a secure process that only the county election officials are able to participate in.
Yes, and there is a chain of custody. So there is a step-by-step. I believe earlier in the chat, the information was written, but there's also literally a step-by-step guide. Who picks up, where they're delivered, how they're counted, when they're open. But there's a definite chain of custody to make sure that they are legitimate.
Awesome. Thank you.
And the last question that we have is, a lot of measures, specifically in California, are convoluted. Is there any way to put them in terms that a layman can understand?
Yes. So there's a lot, you probably already started to see a lot of different like voter guides come out from different places because people are trying to talk to their communities about what's happening. So I will say first, we will have a webinar on October 20th. It's a statewide overview of the ballot propositions. It is also nonpartisan, so we're not trying to sway you either way, but there will be a webinar for that as well, which we will send out the information about, so look for that because they'll go through every single ballot proposition. Number 2, in the resources that we send out afterwards, we'll actually have a few different links to places that you can go to. The 2 that we recommend the most are Ballotpedia and Voters Edge. Ballotpedia is United States wide. You can put in your address and it'll show you your local ballot and it'll show you everything on the ballot. It explains who the person is, their background, it explains the ballot proposition, and it's fairly understandable. Voters Edge, which is just for California, will also, you put in your address, it shows you your local ballot, it tells you everything about the candidates, what their philosophies are, who they stand, what they stand for, all of that. So those, as far as websites, are the two places that I would recommend you to go to find out what is on your ballot, to understand it. And we'll also have more links in the resource that we send after the webinar. And yes, that's ballotpedia.org and votersedge.org. I think that was all of the questions. So anything we didn't get to, we will absolutely, we'll include all of that in the frequently asked questions with resources for everyone. And so now we're going to do our little gift card drawing, evaluations drawing. Edie, if you are ready, and then we'll let everyone go.
So we've had a little bit of technical difficulties, but I am trying to work it out for us. Can you tell me,
sounds good.
you just want me to spin and give the names, or do you want to see the wheel and then I can try to figure that out?
How about we just spin and give the name, since that would probably be easier, right?
Okay, I'm going to try it out. Here we go.
Okay, sounds good. We use a randomizer that picks the name. So everyone who submitted their evaluation up till now will be included.
Okay, 1 second. So our first raffle winner is Lynn Warner. Yay!
Lynn Warner, is that what you said?
Lynn
Yay,
Warner.
Thank you. Lynn Warner, yay. So you'll get a $10 gift card. It'll be for Amazon or groceries or something like that, but you will get a $10 gift card. Thank you for filling out your evaluation. All right, for
our second winner is Grace McCullough.
All right, Grace, thanks for joining us.
Thank you for joining, Grace McCullough. So you will also get a $10 gift card. These will be emailed to everyone who's a winner. We have your email address, we'll email them to you. Next winner?
Next winner is Deidre Hooley.
Woo! Congratulations, Deidre.
Deidre Hooley, thank you for joining, and you will get an email $10 gift card as well. Thank you. Next, please.
Next winner is Alan Peck.
Congratulations, Alan. Thank you for joining us.
You will also get a $10 gift card. And our last $10 gift card goes
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Our last winner is Carol Trescott.
Woo, Carol. Congratulations, everybody.
So you will also get a $10 gift card that will be emailed to you from like a fun place, Amazon or something of that nature. Thank you so much for completing your evaluation. All right, next slide, and I will turn it over to you, Thor.
Go Delta.
Thank you, Alan.
Thanks, Alan.
Welcome.
All right, thank you, thank you. Congratulations to all of our winners. Thank you for joining us tonight. We hope this information was helpful to you. And we hope you will join us next Tuesday, October 13th, to hear all about voting by mail. Make sure you bring a friend and spread the word, as we're conducting Think Tank Tuesdays all month long. Thank you to the Social Action Committee and Foothill alumni members for joining, participating, and working hard on this event, and all who have participated. We thank you so much. Have a wonderful evening.
Good night.